My name is Jason Flato, and this is Germ Cells using Twitter to engage students. So first off, what is Twitter? Twitter is a free social networking and microblogging service that enables its users to send and read messages. These are known as tweets. Tweets are text-based posts of up to 140 characters displayed in the author's profile page and delivered to the author's subscribers, who are known as followers. Senders can also restrict delivery to those in their circle of friends or by default allow open access. Users can send and receive tweets via their Twitter website, which is twitter.com, a short message service, also known as SMS, or any other external applications. For instance, many people have iPhones or smartphones. The reason why I started using Twitter in my classroom is that I was sort of looking for a way to engage students in a different way. Teaching philosophy, of course, has its challenges, and I always use primary text in my philosophy courses. Much of the reading is not easy, and I generally tell my students that yes, philosophy is going to demand patience, time, effort, and I stress to them that its concepts have to be grasped slowly. It's unsurprising that over-hasty readers might be discouraged by rocky textual terrain. Contemporary philosopher Alan Badiou puts it, "We have to learn a slightly foreign vocabulary that has to be learned really as we go along. So the time of philosophy, protected by its writing, excludes all haste." End quote. As with any course, the student's success or failure depends upon their willingness to try to read carefully and think seriously. This, as anybody who teaches knows, is challenging. That is, getting the students to sit down and spend the time reading the material is difficult enough. Having them read in strange, seemingly obscure texts written by people with funny names that talk weird is even harder. In my philosophy courses over the years, I've had a number of different quasi-coercive routines for students to engage the text, whether be it informal journals, paraphrasing, reaction papers, worksheets, study questions, and more directly coercive measures like quizzes. So I toyed with the idea of having an online discussion component for the course, but realized at bottom I was probably arriving at the problem far too late. I found that students generally have the most trouble dealing with sustained arguments that have lots of moving parts. This goes off very often hand in hand with an inability to recognize or read tone, and more broadly, poor or minimally unthinking reading skills. So I'm fairly certain that this has to do with a fundamentally more passive relationship to language. In other words, language works on us rather than us reflecting on how language is seeking to affect and mold our thinking in one manner or another. So critical thinking, it seems, needs to come after a critical consciousness. What I'm pitching is that perhaps Twitter can help us out here. In other words, how it can help us, educators, help to foster and produce this sort of critical distance between text and content. So to combat the passive and limpy nature of many of our students' reading habits, I've initiated a little experiment that has my students making use of Twitter as something akin to underlining the text, or better, jotting down reading notes in the margin. Now, I started using Twitter in my Introduction to Philosophy honors section last fall, which met twice a week for an hour and 15 minutes. Generally, the class was a combination of lecture and discussion, and there's anywhere between 12 to 15 students. The course is an introduction to the history of philosophy, and generally I orient myself around some central problems that the heavy hitters throughout the history of philosophy have faced. We cover 6 to 10 thinkers. At the end of the course, students should have a good idea about some of the major strands of philosophical thought and should be able to speak intelligibly about each thinker we cover. In other words, what's their problem? How do they solve it? How do they not solve it? So, Twitter overall, at least my hope, is a way for us instructors to engage students to do what? Well, think. So Twitter can help students to develop strategies and tactics for negotiating difficult text, can help them to develop this critical consciousness and to develop a critical sensibility with argumentation. Overall, my wager is this: Twitter can help students produce a critical consciousness. This slide is particular of the assignment. And overall, based on informal conversation and a survey I distributed, the students seem to like using Twitter, and more importantly, find the discussions with each other and myself and the requirement to tweet useful. All of the students have agreed that Twitter has helped them hone their reading skills. That is, it helps them to identify the philosophical arguments in a text. Moreover, the students feel that they are better able to analyze and articulate philosophical arguments. Generally, the students felt that using Twitter helped them to engage the material. This is all well and good, but what about the view from my window? Well, given its character restrictions, Twitter is a bit limiting. That is, one can only use 140 characters. That's including spaces and periods and other punctuation marks. So in this regard, it's a bit limiting. Students then are not able to go into a lot of detail in their comments. However, I think the anorexia of Twitter is an advantage. Why? It forces students to be direct and concise. Students do, however, and will post more than one tweet if necessary, that is, continuing one thought from one tweet to the next. I've discouraged this in the past, but it seems to work fine. One of the other things I was also concerned about was what I call text messaging newspeak. To my surprise and actually delight, only one or two students routinely posted their tweets this way. I generally try to read the responses on Twitter before class and try to address them. And here's a screenshot of the Twitter course page from last fall. Overall, more than one student have been able to follow one germ cell or one idea that they tweeted about and continue with it throughout the class, building a paper out of it towards the end. So I've been trying to encourage my students to follow up on the anorexic ideas they find or they tweet about after class or before class and develop them. So overall, I think the Twitter experiment has proved successful primarily because it forces students to not only to passively read the material, but actually enter into a conversation with the material. So tweets range from questions to which other students, to my surprise and delight again, actually offered responses, to comments, to critiques, and so on. So even though my class had between 12 to 15 students, only a fraction actively participate in class discussions. Also, because the students are so bottom line oriented, they are motivated, I suppose, in part because they know that their participation grade was in part determined by this tweeting. That said, the great majority of my students have been comfortable enough with the medium and have most times participated beyond my expectations, very often continuing discussions well after the class, and in one case after the semester was over.